So to begin this next part about how to fill the BOD bottles, I'm going to bring us back to the sheet where it kind of explains what we need to add to each of the samples. So for instance, I'm going to be adding the seed to the samples first. Pink means that the sample is seeded. Green means that nitrification inhibitor is added, and blue means that you add both the seed and nitrification inhibitor. So you are able to see that clearly right across the top of each line. Then also there's an amount of samples shown here. This amount isn't always constant. For instance, during heavy rain events, you might need to increase the volume of the rod to 10 and 12, for instance. And sometimes these values change over time. The most up-to-date values are usually shown here on a piece of paper that is taped to the side of the BOD area. So now I'm going to seed the samples that need to be seeded, which is our final effluent, seed, and D&G. So I take this pipetter, which is stored on this pipette rack here. I grab a pipette tip from inside this box and I attach it to the bottom. Then, so for this pipette, there is a kind of two markers in it. If you press down, there's kind of a light stop, but you can push through it to go all the way to the bottom. So you're going to push the cap all the way to the bottom of the pipetter, and you're going to put it into the seed approximately 2 inches down. We just let this sample settle for 15 minutes, so it's important not to just take what's at the very top and not what's at the bottom, so try to stay to that 2 inches. Then I'm going to go to my sample that needs to be seeded, and I'm going to slowly press down to the first stopper. Now I'm going to take it out and then refill by releasing the top of the pipetter and coming back and doing the same thing with the next bottle. So I've just seeded all of my final samples. Now I'm going to seed the previous day final and my D&Gs. And then I'm going to expel the excess out over the side of our BOD desk table area. So now that I've added seed to my sample, I'm going to show this worksheet again. You can see there's little check boxes here, so you can check off saying, yes, I seeded the samples in order to keep track. Next, I'm going to take this rubber stopper. This is another way to put samples into our bottles. And I'm going to put seed into the seed bottles. For this, I took a plastic pipette tip, which is stored in the first drawer of this BOD bench, and I'm going to once again attach our pipette filler to the top of the pipette tip. For this, I know that the volumes are 8, 10, and 12 mils for each of the corresponding bottles for 18, 19, and 20. So I come over to the rack, find 18, 19, and 20, and fill it with its corresponding amount of liquid. So now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show an example of how to fill some different samples as well. So not all of them use our pipetter. For instance, our final effluent samples, they are going to use this graduated cylinder here. So I know that, for instance, bottle number 11 is going to get 290 mils of sample. So I put the final effluent on the stirrer with a stir bar in it. I'm going to take it off, and I'm going to fill the graduated cylinder to 290. And in between the different samples, I put it back on the stirrer. That's important to make sure you get a nice homogeneous sample. You don't want to let things settle in between when you're filling a bottle. So I would continue this process of filling the graduated cylinder with the amount indicated on the sheet into the appropriate bottle for all of the final samples, and do the same for the previous day final as well. When filling the north and south, it's also important to put the north, south, and raw. It's important to also put these on the stir plate before you insert a sample, and you do this similar to the seed in when you use one of these pipette bowl fillers and a plastic pipette tip, and you will fill up this appropriate amount. In between samples, you don't need to change pipette tips, but it's important to clean it out 3 times. So you'll fill it all the way up a little bit past the 10, and then expel it over the edge into this kind of drain area that goes down into the sink. And then you'll do that in between the north, south, and raw samples, filling up in between the appropriate bottles which are found on the sheet. Then, for the last sample that we have on a daily basis, we have our BOD standard, which is our D&G. So when I'm filling the D&G, it's important to use a glass pipette tip instead of one of the plastic ones. They're class A and they're more precise. I also try to look at the bottom of the pipette tip as well and make sure it's not too skinny and narrow, that it has a hard time for the solution to come out. You use this the same way that you would the plastic pipette tip, but it provides more precise control. So I'm just going to take 6 mils of it, which is the amount that we always use with our D&G. And I'm going to put it into the appropriate bottle as such. So if I was finishing up this rack, if I actually put in all the samples into each of these, I would then go back to my sheet, and I would see which ones require nitrification inhibitor. So the blue ones and the green ones here. So I'm going to go show you what adding nitrification inhibitor looks like. So we have this bottle right here, and it says 2 shots written on it. And by 2 shots, that means you're going to come over to your bottle that needs the inhibitor. You're going to pick it up, and you're going to flip it upside down, kind of shake it so that all the powder comes down. And you're going to push this button right here towards the short end, like that. So flip, press the button. I usually flip it back and do it again, so that's kind of, each one of those is a shot. So I just added 2 shots. Then, after I add nitrification inhibitor to all the bottles that need it, I then will take my clamped dilution water, unclamp it, and then continue to fill up the bottle until it's filled. So when it's filled, it goes about halfway up the neck. I'm going to do it and then bring it closer so you can potentially see what that will look like. So these bottles kind of flare out at the top here. So when we say halfway up the neck of the bottle, we mean until approximately here on the bottle, so that when you put the cap in, it overflows, so it has a nice tight seal around it with water over the top, but it isn't overflowing too much where you lose the sample over the edge. And so I would continue that process after I've added everything to fill up all the bottles to kind of that halfway up the neck of the bottle point, and then I would go over and read their initial DOs. And that's how you fill the BOD bottles.